You may have to turn up volume on your.
I did.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna mute. Okay, good. All right. Now it feels like everyone's comfortable. I'm gonna mute everyone, talk a little bit, and then I'm gonna ask a couple questions, get input from other people on this. And okay. All right. So a little bit about what this topic is about. It started for me when I first started to do work in somatics, which is to actually explore what's happening in your body when you're going through your thought processes and when you're going through your decision-making process. And I started to read the deeper level of signals that I think I was ignoring for a long time. And it became a little bit of an obsession for me because once you start to feel into your decision-making process, once you start to feel the world and turn the volume up on your inner signal, you start to want to just follow that signal all the time. You know, it can play with the world. And in some ways, that game almost always led to something really useful for me. It led me to something that I had not explored before. It led me to step outside of the well-worn pathways of my thought patterns. And I think that's one of the biggest gifts of exploring this subject. It starts to let you feel into what's happening outside of your well-worn map of the world. And to speak to this, I'm just curious. Chat me in the room has done some work with their chin. Like, has anybody been practicing, honing, including their intuition in their decision-making process? Chat me while I'm talking. I'd love to hear a little bit about other people's experience with this. To me, we receive a lot of thinking patterns from our world. You know, many of us are born into a kind of acculturation, of course. And an acculturation, you could say, is a series of really well-worn highways of thought patterns. You know, it's like, I'm spending a lot of time in Greece, so I'm really becoming hyper aware of the kind of well-worn thought patterns here because they're a little contrasting to my own. For instance, it's a cardinal sin in a Greek household to walk around without flip-flops on. You know, you just don't walk around barefoot. In almost anybody's house you're in extreme horror if you walk around without pantoflas, little flip-flops on. And that's an example of people how to, and through that you kind of get this super highway of thought, if that makes sense. Everyone starts to agree that you should wear flip-flops inside. A lot of the mapping of our life that we go through is where we are trying to strategize about the future, but we're often pulling from the historical ideas that other people who tread the path are giving us, and we're using that as our navigation space. We're using that as the map that we're, to a big degree, that's a successful thing to do. You know, you're looking at other people's success patterns. You're able to, oh good, Caspian. You're able to construct the way that you navigate these thought patterns, but well worn before you. As we start to borrow thought patterns from different people, oftentimes they conflict. You know, there's not just one map of the world that we should be live like this way, and this person says, well, you should live like this way. And already we're in this conflict where we're not necessarily able to clearly see to clearly see what's the right path to take. It's just curious, is it cutting out for anybody else? Is anybody else having unstable internet? Yeah? Yes? No? Oh no. No. Okay. I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna try this another way. Hold please. I'm gonna. This will take 1 second. I'm gonna come in with a phone signal, see if this works any better. All right. 1 second, sorry about this. Okay, is this any better for people? Oh, is this any better for people? Sorry. Okay, I'm gonna pin this. Sorry, technical. I'm gonna mute myself. Oh, no. Infinite. Sorry about this. Mute myself. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, thank goodness. Oh. These are the things I fear the most when doing classes like this. All right, good to hear. I'm just gonna go off the cell phone signal. So part of that is when you're routing through the thought processes, you're either moving through your historical thought processes, or you're borrowing from people who say this is the way you should do things. And in a way, they all feel the same. There's not really a way to differentiate between this thought route and that thought route. And I wanted to create a little bit of a metaphor that might illustrate this. If you have ever looked at Google Maps Street View, you'll notice a scene of little streets that all look the same, right? And if you've ever been on a bicycle through a city, then you'll understand why that's not always the most helpful that's not always the most helpful map. If anybody's ever been in San Francisco, if you're going to go up a 17th Street and you look at the map, it just says, oh, if you want to go from the Castro to the Lower Haight, it's just a direct route across 17th Street. But if you ever decide you're going to go on a bicycle, you're looking at this map, you're going to go up one of the most extreme hills you've ever seen in your life. This hill is like, it's like a 35% grade. Looking at that map of reality, it made perfect sense. It was a direct line, but you're not able to see this topographical rise. You're not able to see this thing that's not represented on the map. Now, if you use Google Maps, you actually route a route on a bicycle from the Castro to the Lower Haight. It takes you on this thing called the Wiggle. It goes around and around this giant mountain, and it's a little bit of a roundabout way, but you get to your destination feeling a lot more. You're not a sweaty mess. You don't want to throw your bike in a dumpster by the time you get to your destination. So, with that metaphor, there are things in our thinking patterns that have a kind of emotional resonance for us. Now, I'm going to say emotional resonance
and vibrational resonance are rather, and they're analogous. Our emotions and our physical signals are the first level that we can reference these energetic signals. It's our first interface with the vibrational qualities of things that we feel out there. And I'm gonna close the screen because that's very distracting. So what does that mean? There is an internal way that you're feeling these vibrations, and there is an external way that you might be perceiving vibrations that are coming at you from the outside world. Most of the things that you're feeling, that I'd say the highest level of signal that you're going to feel out is the way that your brain interprets the meaning behind what you are perceiving in the outside world. If you think like your brain is just scanning the room and collecting a lot of different light pixels, and to your eyeball, maybe one light pixel is a better color, or maybe one light pixel is more interesting, but to your eye, pretty much it's kind of the same signal. But when your brain gets a hold of that signal and starts to create meaning, suddenly you're feeling things in your outside environment. Suddenly you are, suddenly there's a kind of buzz that's happening in your body as you land on different things in the room, or you land on different things in your outside landscape. Let me back up for a second. Why is this important? If you have a 2D map of the world, you're probably going to make some choices that are unnecessarily difficult. You're probably going to make some choices that, because you're attached to this 2D map, you're really not addressing the energetic cost to some of the decisions that you're making, to some of the strategies that you're employing, to some of the things that you're going to say, to some of the places that you put your time. And when you actually are able to tap into this topographical landscape, let's see. Can anyone else not hear me? Oh, okay. Okay, great. Okay, Kyrie, are you? Sorry, we're having. Okay, everyone else is able to hear Kyrie. Maybe you might need to hit your. Okay, great. Kyrie can hear me. All right. So the first level, of this is the internal map of meaning. That's a place where the signal is probably the strongest. It's if we look at it, if we're mapping emotions, just being aware of the kind of buzz that you get emotionally, the kind of buzz you get somatically from each thing that you're looking at, each thing that you're observing, you start to get this kind of depth map. You start to see where, for instance, maybe a thing that you would be tracking is how much pleasure you get from different things in your timeline, in different things on your to-do list, different conversations that you're having, different ways that you're spending your time. Each one of these things has a kind of emotional resonance to it. And if you're mapping it successfully, if you're just spending that time to map it, you start to see the qualitative difference from where you're spending your time. Similarly, the conversations you're having, this is like another terrain that you're moving through. Just in a conversation with another person, everything you say has a kind of buzz to it. Everything you say has an energetic quality to it. Everything that you say has every pause, every direction that you're about to take the conversation has a rich signal that manifests somatically and emotionally, which is meaning that it's referencing kind of vibrational energy that you're feeling, in each little moment. Now, I say this is an internal buzz. This same faculty will sometimes detect things that aren't just internal meaning maps. For instance, if someone you'd never met before comes up to you and you get a kind of felt sense of them that registers a level that doesn't really make sense. Like you're not necessarily able to logically understand why you feel a certain way from them. This maps out to things that come to you, even though you know nothing about them, but you get an instant yes to them, or you get an instant like something saying, don't take this bus, or don't do this thing right now, or don't get on that plane, or don't choose that destination. This is when it moves kind of outside the internal world, and you're actually picking up on signals that may be coming from the outside environment, if that makes sense. So if you would like, let's see, if you would like, okay, great. Question, great. So let me just throw this back at the group. Are we kind of tracking? Do people understand what I'm talking about here? Does anybody have any questions before I move on? And feel free to unmute yourself and talk.
I had a thought come up because I feel like sometimes we feel those like resistances, maybe not even traveling to like necessarily like a physical space, but like a, like a different space. And sometimes I'm noticing that I have a lot of resistance of going there because I just don't know. But then when it's kind of like a battling, like my ego goes like, no, oh my God. And then like, but my intuition says, yeah, I think we should do that. But I think sometimes it's hard to detect who is who and who is right. And I feel like moments of the biggest, like I would experience so much growth anytime I would go like, I feel indifferent about it, but I know a really strong direction of like, just fucking push through the fear. And those are the biggest learning experiences and the biggest releases. And I'm acknowledging that as like, you sometimes don't really know who's talking inside my body right now and who's right and who should I trust and do I need to choose and how does that look like?
Right. That's a really great question you ask. And it's part of the reason why I even titled this as vibrational topography, because a lot of people, when they're talking about following your intuition, they say just follow what feels good, and avoid what doesn't feel good. And right there, you have noticed that behind that rock of fear, over and over again, there's a superpower, or like like a toy in the Cracker Jacks box or something. There's something usually wonderful hidden behind pushing through that fear for you. And this is where the map metaphor comes in. This is a place where you're using that signal, that inner signal, but you have calibrated what that signal means. Like you've mapped out, like this is a moment where I feel kind of bad and kind of scared.
Yeah.
But I've gone through it enough times that now I'm able to put a pin on that map that this is probably something exciting and wonderful for me to break through as soon as I'm ready to.
Right. Well, and there's also the other resistances that we pick up in our own environment. Like it's very often that I take 2 days off and I'm about to leave and I feel really bad about it, even though I have, there's the time and the spaciousness for me to do so. Yet I feel like, but shouldn't I be working? Shouldn't I be hustling? Shouldn't I be? And that's, I think, the societal clutter, emotional, and just the clutter of just like what we should be doing or who would we be doing. And I think sometimes that really tampers my ability to like pull myself literally out of the house to go like, it's okay. Like it's the weekend. You are allowed to go. And yeah, I think the societal voices sometimes get really loud too. There's just all these influences of like, should I follow this pull I'm feeling in my heart?
Yeah. Totally. And there's a lot of conflicting, I think inside of our being, we have a lot of different voices. We have a lot of different personalities that are playing out and competing for our competing for our decision space, or competing for that inner director to choose this particular route.
Yeah.
And especially when we get into shoulds, that's in this zone that I was talking about before, where your map of what needs to happen is coming from many different sources.
Yeah.
Each of them, either acculturation, your past history, what your friends want for you, what your partner wants for you, and it's nice when they're all saying the same thing, but they rarely do. And what I'm saying is that when you're feeling through these decision pathways, each one has a kind of resonance to it. Now, I would love to give everyone a rule that says when your nose tickles and your second chakra is like, yes, that's always going to be a good thing. But that, it's a great experiment to pursue that particular signal. I have an inner signal, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, where as soon as there's kind of an energy uplift or a kind of bigness I feel inside myself energetically, I almost always pick that option. But and it leads to a certain storyline. But there's also a part of me that is watching what's playing out, that runs the experiment, and sometimes ends up maybe in a pitfall. Like I've noticed this works great for most of the decisions in my life, but if the decisions are around things that I have a big cognitive bias, or things I have a lot of fear around, or things that I might have some kind of like addictive tendency around, then suddenly these aren't always the best way to make choices. So that's why I want to really focus on having a vibrational topographical map, because it's participating with the logical faculties, and it's integrating this energetic information, but it's not disabling good logic sometimes. Sometimes good logic is, I love following my intuition almost always, but I love following my intuition with Google Maps, because Google Maps, if I'm going for a hike deep into the woods, I can at least logically think, well, there's no bus stop, at the top of that mountain, or bathroom, or water, and so having a map of the terrain and following the tugs of this inner signal sometimes work better than just only following the signal. Does that make sense to people? I also find that if you have this energetically topographical map, that your brain can see things in the landscape and make better decisions than you would have done without that information. For instance, if you're trying to decide between different shoulds, should I do this, should I do that, should I do that, you want to feel into the energetic qualitative difference between each one. And it doesn't mean you have to choose any energetic quality, but you're just mapping it out. You're just taking a little sample. You say, okay, I'm going to choose the one that feels a little bit like fear, and I'm going to do that 4 or 5 times in a row. And then I'm going to see what happens when I follow my fear, when I try to push through my fear. And that you're taking in the whole experience, and then you're calibrating it back to the way it felt when you were making that decision. And that's when you get a really good map, because you're calibrating your mental meaning structure around it, and you're also sensing the signals that are happening in your body. Okay, now I'm going to back up a little bit to give maybe a little bit better model of what I'm talking about, because on the computer, when I was on the computer, I had 2 really great maps. One map was a map of the age of the ocean floor. And this is a map that took 20 years for the NOAA to develop with different countries. And they took a little boat, and they took it all around the ocean, and they dropped a little core, and they took a sample of the ocean crust. And then they took all those little samples, and they were able to actually create a big map of how old the ocean crust is across all of the oceans. And it's a really fascinating map when you see it, because you can see that part of the ocean crust is only 20 million years old, and part of the ocean crust is 240 million years old. And your brain can actually figure out the slices, like how old each piece of the ocean floor is. And that's done through taking these little bitty energetic readings all along the way. In a similar way, you have a rich reading. You have many, many layers of information feeding into your body. And you're like that little boat going across the ocean. But if you've got your energetic signals turned on and you're letting that information feed into your cognition, you're letting that, well, just by paying attention to it, it's feeding into your cognition. Your brain your brain's going through the experience, and then it's also seeing the diagnostic information that your body is giving you at the same time. And those two things, when done consistently, create this beautiful map of the terrain. Does this make sense to people? I noticed, let's see, Caspian, you just had a question. Yes, okay. So Caspian says, in sum, everything has an emotional resonance. Sometimes the most difficult decisions to make are when all options seem good. This is especially true when the decision may have big impact. For example, 2 really great job offers. And George says, say that one more time. George, can you just unmute and maybe ask me more specifically what you're curious about?
Yeah, you're using the analogy of the ocean floor, and you were talking about taking in the data points and then mapping it to your body and your resonance. And so it seems like is that in summary of what you said?
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. So it feels like you're sort of using the scientific method with your intuition to gather data over time and begin to resonate and say, okay, what's the connection that's happening here? And what's the energetic resonance with each of those? And then being able to then say, oh, okay, this is how this feels when I'm in this situation. And therefore I can kind of know a little bit more, because you're using your intuition as another form of sense to gather that information. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And what's nice is that one thing about the intuitional map is that time is always changing. We're always at a different time address. So the things that maybe you're sensing at one point in time will morph and change, because the terrain is always changing as we move through time. But it's better to have a kind of map is going to change than no map at all. And I kind of liken this to Google Maps. Like Google Maps, when you're using the traffic turned on, Google Maps, you know that one highway has almost always got traffic on it, but at certain times of the day, Google Maps will say, don't go on this road, and also this road is clogged up. So it's a little bit of the same thing. You can start to map the patterns out, but also understand that if you're not too attached to that snapshot in time, that there's maybe more acute information that will come to you intuitionally as well. But you really nailed it on that. It is kind of using the scientific method. What you're doing is if you're pulling in this intuitional information more, and let me say a different way, if you're pulling in this rich, energetic data, if you're pulling in these kind of little vibrations and signals that you're getting along the way, your brain starts to associate that with what you're doing. It starts to associate that with certain conversations and certain choices. And kind of in the background, when you're not looking, your brain is making these meta understandings. It's building these rich maps, in your sleep. so that you just have a better sense of the terrain in your head when you're going about making plans. This is super useful this is really useful because it starts to awaken you out of the sleep of your automated thinking. Does that make sense? You may find you just have the same conversation over and over again. You go through the same route through life over and over again. But if you're paying attention to this inner signal, that's sometimes the alarm that allows you to lift out of the automated pattern. Especially when you notice the peaks and the valleys. So the peaks would be those moments of excitement. you know, and what's cool about these peaks is they're not just like going over the hills behind Portland, you know. These peaks are sometimes non-linear peaks. They're like wormholes. Their peakiness is so high, you know. And sometimes, you know, sometimes they're just like this. Like I notice every time I go to Rooster Rock, I feel this like harmony, you know, comes out of me. It's like, everything in my being feels great, right? But then there are some peaks that are they spike so much that there are whole realities that we can fall into, that if we're not really feeling out that signal, we might miss them. You know, they might register a little bit, but then we kind of let it go. We don't think about it. And these peaks can occur in maybe a conversation with someone, you know, like I've had a single conversation with a person lead to an entirely new way of living, entirely new place of living, or an entire new pathway for my life that I did not see coming. But because I just stayed with a conversation, because I could feel that tingle inside me, I stuck with it, and I kept expanding it. And the next thing I knew, I was in a whole different dimension, if that makes sense. The same can be said for the valleys, which are, let's just say the valleys are those moments that you lose life energy, you know? You, like, God, every time I'm in this conversation, I can feel like the whole energetic system of my body just kind of flattens out. For instance, I can tell every time I read political news, I am not in the same energetic space of that sort of connected unity mentality as I was, you know, even 15 minutes before. Every time I go to Twitter, and so, you know, it took me a whole 2 years to actually map out energetically what's happening, and to pay attention to the energetic reading 15 minutes before and the energetic reading 15 minutes after. And even though I could feel the signal drop over and over and over and over again, it took the 200th time till I really got the meta understanding. Wow, that's not like a 10 life force credit point drop once. That's 10 times 200. And I start to really feel the cost. Oh, someone else. I start to really feel the cost. Hey, Maya, good to see you. I started to really feel the cost, because the map's not just in that moment. The map is like this big meta map. So let me back up a little bit and talk about your little boat going across the ocean, this little piece of you that's taking core samples. And let me just talk about what some of those samples are. In fact, I actually want to reference Maya Lila, who just came in the room, because for her, she told me years ago that the energetic signal that she got was a little tickle in the throat, you know. And so every time her throat felt a little tingle, then she went with that choice. Maya Lila, can you hear me? Are you in the room? Wait, speak up. Turn your speaker on.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Okay. Tell me about, do you still follow your little throat tingle?
I do. It's a little different than that. It is in my throat, but it's more of a constriction or opening. So like when I have to inhale to be able to access it, because I realized this when I was in Hawaii and I was snorkeling and I couldn't use it while I was underwater with my face in the mouth. But I get, I can, like, I ask a question and then I inhale, and if there's constriction, it's a no, and if it's open, it's a yes. So that's my body signal.
So that's great. And you know, Maya Lila used that you probably used that for years, right? That decision-making process.
Yeah, I mean, I still do. There's been a few times where I definitely decided not to do it just because I didn't want to go through the discomfort of whatever was telling me to do. I'll get like a kind of like a directive or an idea of like, oh, like I should do this. And then I check, you know, oh, am I supposed to do that? And then I try to follow it. But I use it for all kinds of things, like what to order at a restaurant.
Good.
This is so interesting to me, because I just about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, started doing an internal scrying technique. and using my intuition to say, would it be best for me to do this, or would it be best for me to do this? And feeling how deep that energy goes into my body through my chakra system. And whichever goes deepest in is the answer. And if they're the same, it's usually a no or a not right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same for me, but
and I do it for the same. I do it for everything from like huge decisions to like exactly like what do I want to eat right now? Because it's not always consequential, and I don't always know, but it helps. So
yeah.
And do you, Maya? Do you get points where if you don't get an answer, or if the answer is not right now, do you continue asking until you kind of become more certain about it? Does it take more than one round to kind of come to the decision?
Yeah.
Sometimes, usually, if I get like a non-answer or not right now, because I'm asking about something that doesn't matter. Like either I can just pick whatever I want. Like intuition's like, I'm not going to give you the answer for this. Or if I'm asking about something that I'm not really supposed to ask about, like for somebody else, that's it'll either give me a non-answer or some. I've gotten a few wrong answers when asking for someone else. So I learned that lesson early on. Like, oh, this is just for me. This isn't for what kind of beer my friend wants out of the fridge. I tried that.
Right. Okay. Okay.
So this kind of brings up a thing that really, it's the calibration part. It's that there are signals, and there is the kind of direct signal, like Mylila said, every time she has the constriction or the opening, like that would just make the decision. But there's also the kind of experiment that you're running. You're developing a relationship to the signal itself. Mm-hmm. So whatever the signal is, you're in a conversation with it, and you're watching what plays out as certain signals happen. Sometimes the signal is very binary, like open or closed energy. For me, I try to map out all the energy centers in my body. That's like a major diagnostic for me. So the heart, and behind the heart is one qualitative area, the stomach, another qualitative area, the throat, another qualitative area, the kind of headiness, like how much of my energy has moved up into the top of my head versus, do I feel energy moving through my body? These are all kind of like different colors, these are different signals, and I'm trying to read them all. And I will notice for me, and this is kind of how much complexity, how much of your brain, because it takes brain energy to map these signals, if that makes sense. Like when you're in a conversation, you can either be completely in the other person's reality, or you can withdraw a little bit of energy, reserve it to read your own signals while you're in that conversation. So it's a little bit like how much your brain processing energy do you want to use to map out all these signals coming in your body. For me, I like a lot, like each one of these energy centers is like a different, it's a different thing in the terrain. Like if you're using the traditional chakra system, your throat, this is your ability to communicate and express yourself. And even if it's not, I tell myself it is, so that I'm like, okay, if you want to tell me something about communication, we'll register it here, because that's it's that collaboration between signal and the meaning making engine of your brain. If that makes sense. Heart, like I think we all understand heart energy and like what certain signals mean. For me, there's like front of heart, back of heart. There's even like the balance in the heart. That's its own signal. Stomach, tightness, clenching, openness, like or even is food digesting, like do I hear gurgles, like happy gurgles, or like tightnesses. A big one for me is like that connected to the ground kind of thing. And for me,
can you tell us a little bit of what those represent for you? Like especially around the heart? Like what signal, what information are you getting from that?
Well, like I have been able to map out that a certain heaviness in the heart might mean that a certain heaviness in the heart might be associated with not being true to my heart, or having my loving skills, my loving faculties, serving my ego rather than the ego or the personality serving the desires of the heart. Like that. And this is why the map is important, because through experimentation, I'm getting the raw signal, and then I'm playing the experiment of saying, well, what happens? You know, what happens when I get the signal? What the signal comes up, I make a choice, or I watch the thing play out, and then what does my brain understand watching that whole cycle play out? And then that, you know, that gets recalibrated into what I understand that signal to mean. And sometimes I rely really heavily on signals, and I might feel like I've run the experiment for years, and then I get to a point in life, and this is where it's important. You also watch the outside reality. You know, that's another piece of the signal. Like, how does your life play out? You know, do you end up in a place that you don't like? And it's like, well, did following the signal kind of, like, it's nice that I followed this signal, but like, what was the result after 4 years of it? You know, and that's an important thing. That's the calibration. You know, like Olivia said, I think that was such a great example. I think a lot of people, when they come up on their fear, they back up. They say that's not pleasant. But for Olivia, it was her breakthrough moment. You know, so every time you know, in Olivia's map, every time that fear peak is there, then there's a little flag. It's like, maybe you should go through this. You know, but that's a collaboration. That's a mapping collaboration between the signal and like running the experiment and understanding what it means. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Caspian, you had a question about, you know, like signals that aren't really a peak or a valley. Can you? Caspian's in Ecuador, so he's having the same problem I'm having. He was asking a question where, you know, when one signal is not that differentiated from another signal, and there's a lot of different ways to interpret that. For me, that usually means like either way is fine. You know, like this is not a big consequential decision in your life. You know, this job or that job, it's going to be kind of the same thing. You know, that was his example, I think. So that's what it means for me, and I think this is important. I don't want to impose my way of mapping onto anyone else, because I notice that other people's way that they've mapped this sometimes gives them insights that I have been blind to. So it's really important to create your own map, you know, and to run your own experiments and have that your own relationship to the signals coming to you. I'm going to go through an exercise in just a minute that kind of will show you the way that I map things happening in my body. If that's too complex, maybe a thing to do is just to map one little signal and to go through your day following that signal. You know, maybe there's a kind of uplift in your heart you feel. It might be useful, just like in every decision for a few days, like follow that signal, see what happens, run the experiment, see if it takes you to any new places. Does someone have a question?
Yeah, I just had a comment I wanted to make real quick.
Okay.
And let me know if I can't be heard. But you know, recently I made some pretty big decisions, and I felt really torn about it because it was deciding between two things that I loved. And one was something that I loved that I was very, very familiar with, and the other was something that was new and very different from me.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't have both of those. I needed to choose one or the other. And the way that I approached the decision-making process was to adopt. One day, I'm going to be in this frame of mind of making this choice. And then the next day, I will completely adopt the other choice psychologically in my mind.
Yeah.
And I actually didn't need to pick day two because day one was so profound for me to be able to, I was just like, oh, this is the choice. And I didn't even need to look a second time. So anyway.
That's great. And what I heard you say that is the technique that you used was that you expanded into the frequency spectrum of that choice.
Yeah.
Almost any of these frequencies that we run across, you can can dial into the frequency through focus. Like for you spent a day as that choice, which is a great way to kind of, it's like zooming in, you know, like coming into higher resolution, you're like getting really close to it. And that's a really great way to explore the kind of signal in that spectrum between this. It's like this, it's everything. It's like all around you. You're in the spectrum of it. My example was, you know, like having a 5-minute conversation with someone where all of my spidey senses just got electrified. And instead of, you know, leaving that 5-minute conversation like I had intended to, staying with that 5-minute conversation all through the night, you know, and suddenly this thing that was just going to be a 5-minute moment of my life became a wormhole to a different reality, you know?
Oh, that's a tough one for me. Like the moment that you know, sitting with someone becomes something that's I guess in my orbit. That's hard for me because I feel so connected to other people that sometimes I totally get sucked into their reality in a way that, you know, I don't know what it is that I want anymore. So yeah, it's like going on a date with somebody and you're sitting at you know, a dinner table somewhere in a restaurant, and it's like, okay, so I'm here for the meal, but I'm also like way into a conversation with this person. And yeah, there are like some of those little spidey sense kind of things, like you're not a bad person, but like maybe you're not my people, but now I'm stuck with you for the course of this meal. And you know, but to lose my own sense of like what it is that I'm actually looking for in a date, to get out of a date, or will there be a second date? And you get to that conversation at the end, well, this was really great, we should do it again. And you're just like, do I want to? I don't know. This wasn't bad, but I mean, and maybe we could even be like good friends, but I don't know if I want to date you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, so this kind of brings up another topic that I was actually going to teach in another class, but I think talking about it a little bit here is important. And this is especially for empathic people who have their vibrational microphone way up, right? We're picking up other people's signals, and this is a you know, this is a evolutionary trait of humans that actually makes us link up well into pack and herds and become more successful at survival, right? That like we have like inner Wi-Fi, you know, we have mirror neurons that pick up other people's emotional signals and allow us to monitor them and resonate with them, right? So evolutionary plus for humans, but one of the problems is that if you have that microphone turned up, you're constantly being tuned by a loud signal around you. You know, you're as kids, we have this microphone on really high because we're looking for love, connection. You know, we're depending on our parents completely for survival. So it really helps to know what mom likes and what mom doesn't like, and to have a really loud map of that signal and that terrain. You know, like this will get me spanked and this will get me cookies. You know, so so for empaths, you know, on a date, you know, like you said, the problem is you might get so tuned into their signal that you're not able to actually hear like, what is it that I really, really want? So the tool that kind of helps with this is a balance inside our own being kind of tool. It's that we get anchored back into our body, first of all, you know, because sometimes we project ourselves, we project the sensitivity of our brain onto another person's face, onto another person's signals. And this, I want you to think of it like a dial, you know, like you have a dial in your head that like an equalizer that says, turn this person's signal way up and lose more of my signal, or turn my signal way up and have them on, you know, almost to mute, right? There's always this, mechanism in you that can kind of balance between these two ways of being. And the need for where that equalizer should be is always adjusting. You know, if you're sitting in front of your boss and he's like reading you the riot act. He's like, you need to do this and this and this unless you're fired. Well, you're probably going to have your signal all the way on your boss, right? But, you know, if you're on that date or you're with your partner and they're in a bad mood and you're trying to maintain the quality of your mood, then you probably need to move them a little bit more towards mute and have the signal a little bit more towards you. And what this does is it's a moderating with the outside signals, and it's also allowing yourself to kind of anchor back into, anchor back into where the signal has the most meaning for you. And this is another one of those things you're going to have to play with. You know, this is not like a try, like I can't say you should always be here or here. You need to kind of adjust as time goes on. This brings up another thing, which is something that we get from Aristotle, which is Nicomachean, I'm probably slaughtering that, ethics. And it's the idea that what we actually need, meaning what the right energy to employ, therefore the virtue is always moving around. And this is where the idea of the golden mean came from. It's the idea that when, let's just say, pacifism and peacefulness is maybe a nice value, and maybe you're usually in that value spectrum, and sorry, I'm losing battery here. And maybe your default is to go towards, there we go, okay. Maybe your default is to be more on the pacifist spectrum. But it's not a virtue if there's like a bunch of barbarians coming to slaughter your family. Like the right place on that virtue spectrum between qualities would probably be to move a little bit more towards getting your fist out and grabbing your sword and defending your family. So it's this idea that, in that we're always trying to find that right balance point, between different values. Most values exist on a polarity spectrum, and we're constantly sliding up and down. All the things that I'm talking about today are on one of those spectrums, like how much you're listening to someone else's signal versus how much you're listening to the internal signal. Okay, is that helpful to anybody? I just wanted to dive in that for a little bit. Okay, got some head nods. Okay. Also, it's really nice when people speak up in the room because I don't feel like I'm just talking to myself. So if you have a question, it's really nice to hear voices.
This brings up a conversation that you and I had years ago of being in a party, and I was feeling. We walked in, as a queer person or a gay man, you walk into a group of gay men, and there's immediately this thing of like assessment and judgment, and do I want to sleep with them? Do they want to sleep with me? Like all of that sort of thing, and you're going around the room. And I remember saying that to you in a party of people who I am not necessarily super fond of, but I was wanting to see if there were other people there who I could connect with. And one of the things that you said was stay on your own horse, and like literally like feel the horse underneath you. Like, and you were talking about rooting into my root and the mula bandha and that kind of stuff, but using that analogy of being on a horse's saddle and like kind of feeling that tightness. And I've used that, and I think about that a lot. Right, it's something that really resonated with me, and it's a technique, it's a technology that I use. I've also though found that, and this happened to me with an old friend a few weeks ago, where if I have not done my own centering that day, and as an empath, I can be very open. Mm-hmm. Somebody can go deeply into something of their own, either their own trauma or their own grief, mm-hmm. and I get pulled along with them. Or they're so excited that I get like overwhelmed by that. And so they both feel like ocean waves or currents or riptides of emotion that come through, right? And so I find then that I have to retreat and really root down into my root in a defensive way, as opposed to a preemptory way where I'm not wandering, but instead I'm like not wanting to lose myself.
Yeah.
And so it feels like a similar thing that you're talking about of the equalizer. But from your perspective, or from when you were describing it, there's more, you have agency throughout the whole thing in how you're talking about it. It feels like you're able to say, I'm going to change this and I'm going to change that, depending on what's going on with the energetic, as opposed to the way that I feel like I was looking at it was they're both sort of reactionary or defensive in the sense of like, oh my God, I'm now in this situation, I have to react, as opposed to saying, oh no, I can just sort of tune this one way or another. And I'm giving a judgment here, but I guess I'm thinking about it more from source of where I'm coming from in that moment, right? And there are moments too, like sort of like what Olivia was saying, like fear comes, and in big points, I can come back and be like, oh, wait a second. Don't you remember how you used to look at fear? You used to walk toward that fear and feel like what that's going to be like, right? And so having that moment of agency. So there's something there of, or I guess my question is, what is it that's underneath there? Is it because you're constantly running this experiment that you're always in that sort of driver's seat of agency, or what's allowing you to stay in that regardless of what's happening?
Well, sometimes being an agency is like, maybe a good example would be when you're riding a bicycle and you have a certain amount of speed and you have a certain amount of comfort and familiarity with a bicycle, it's really easy to cut a sharp corner or to avoid a car or a pothole because you've gotten a level of comfort with it. And then there are some things that are more like dragging rocks around, that to get agency, it's like moving heavy furniture because you're not that comfortable with it. Your brain hasn't really worked out the subtleties of the movement, and just some things are really difficult, like getting other people to do what you want. It's often really difficult. So, some things it's easy to get agency with, and it's as subtle as like a lean to the right, a lean to the left. But some things you'll find that you can't get agency in the moment, but you might get agency through a series of interactions and experiments where, you get to the end of the interaction, you're just like, oh God, that felt terrible. I got lost in that. And you can't fix it in that moment, but you're kind of going into more observation mode where you're like, okay, let me think about this more. I'm going to observe this interaction. Next time it happens again, next time I feel this way again, I'm going to see if there's any way I can maneuver that might get me out of that. There's a lot of those things for me that are ongoing experiments. There's no grace there yet.
Right.
I'm
Okay.
pursuing grace, but I'm definitely not there yet. So that might fall into that category for you, where it's like, this might be one of those lessons that takes 2 years of awkward interactions before you kind of find the finesse and become a good navigator. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I guess a kind of follow up for that would be, when do you decide to follow up with that person and share with them what happened to you in that situation, and where's your line of responsibility and where's their line of responsibility?
Yeah, I mean that's a complex answer for that, because there are different games you play in a relationship. One of them is negotiating your needs. That's a great game to play. And the other game to play is being more and more responsible for your own emotional experience. And it seems like those two games maybe conflict a little bit, because on one hand, it's like, I would like to be with this person and whatever's happening emotionally, and not have it overpower me. But at the same time, there's this need to like tell this person what you need. Like, hey, I don't want to hear 2 hours of your rant.
Right.
I just can't deal with it. So that, and you might notice like you want to play one game one day and the other game the other day. And maybe it's a little mix of both, and there's no wrong way, really. It's just it's an experiment. It's like, okay, I'm going to try to address it this way one day. That didn't work so well. Let me just try to be with it. And, maybe you kind of get a blended strategy that works for you.
Okay.
I find that with, every time I do couples counseling and I talk about, owning your emotional experience, and then we talk about things like nonviolent communication, asking for your needs, they seem kind of opposed, but it's alchemy. It's like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a big chunk of this, a sliver of that, and then you might find like just the right formula. that allows you to feel like there's some finesse. There's so many things in life that are like that, you know. Running a day in your business, you know, it's like a little bit of checking emails, a little bit of conversations around the water cooler, a little bit of like designing something in Photoshop, you know, like to make it all work. And so probably the same way with that conversation. Okay, we're going a little long. If just to let you know, I'm going to record this, so if you want to listen to it later, if anybody has to leave, you know, don't feel bad about it. But I wanted to go a little bit into a couple of exercises that help calibrate and hone. Does that sound good? Okay. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Like, these questions have been great. Okay. All right. So let me look at my notes real quick. Okay, so we talked about a little bit about the different terrains where it's good to feel these things out. Like one exercise you could do to just feel this is to look around the room that you're in and to see, as your eye lands on each object in the room, what kind of resonance you get with each object. Like, what happens? You know, are there things in your room that that really light you up? Are there things that are just kind of neutral? Are there anything in your room that just kind of lands flat, you know, or like actually you feel uncomfortable with?
Yeah, when I have like a mess of stuff that I don't know what to do with, that makes me feel uncomfortable. Like, you know, or you open that drawer that has all the stuff that you don't know what to do with.
Yeah.
That makes me uncomfortable.
Good example. And the signal that you get can exist on a number of levels. It can be the object itself is just like, I mean, let's just say the letter opener on your desk was used to stab someone. And you're just like, that doesn't feel good, you know? And then there's the part where it's just your interpretation of the meaning around the object, you know? You're just like, you like that's the mess to clean up. You know, there's the mess, the object mess to clean up, then there's the meaning encapsulating the thing that you're looking at that might be the mess to clean up. And I'd say the majority of signals you're going to get are going to be this kind of signal. It's the meaning that you've encapsulated around the thing that you're seeing or saying or observing that is actually causing you this deep downward tug in your energy field. Okay. And then
I had I had an uncle who was very mentally ill and kind of not somebody you could have a relationship with, or he didn't have relationships with anybody. But when he passed on, there were a number of items from his home that, you know, went to various members of the family. And I always kind of felt like his ghost haunted those items, even though they, you know, were part of what made my house a home, that part of, you know, the things that that held, you know, meaning for me in some way. But I always also kind of wondered if those items were cursed.
Right. Totally. I mean, they really can be. Like, that's one of the cool things is once you start tapping into this signal spectrum, is you start to pick up on real vibrations that are not just generating from your own being, but they're out there. You know, it's like it's a rock thrown into the pond way out there that you're feeling the ripple from. Can anybody else think of any other thing that they could, when you feel these signals, is there anything else that you might be feeling?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess this is a share. So I try to practice this in some way, but so last weekend, actually, or just, yeah, this past weekend, I had these plans to go with some people to Vermont, and they were going to do like a mini Burning Man at like someone's property. And it sounded really great. And then leading up to it, I actually just like really didn't want to go. And I really like had this intuition to not go. And for like a few days, I really tried to tap into like really like why I didn't feel that bad, and if it was going to be something like bad, like I just couldn't figure it out. And I really tapped in, and then I felt like kind of neutral in the end. And so I ended up going, and I felt pretty good. And then after the first day, I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to connect with these people. These are not my people. I like don't like camping, and I want to leave. And my intuition was right to not go, but yet I overrode it with, well, maybe there is some benefit to it or whatever. So I actually ended up leaving. And then we were all in this car with someone. So we stayed in Vermont, and then we ended up going back to this campground, and everyone was like, oh, it was the best weekend of our lives. It was so magical. Everything was perfect. And I was just like, wow, but like for you, but like that just wasn't my vibe. I just didn't feel like that was going to be like available to me, like that feeling.
Yeah.
And so in that time, like, what am I really supposed to do? Do I like cancel plans last minute for people because I'm sort of like neutral about something?
Yeah.
Like it was like I kind of felt like in a wallow of indecision for like quite a while about it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really tell like what, how to make it better necessarily. Like I had a poor gauge on like how could I have done that better?
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. And this is one where the experimenting really comes in handy, because I can't give you just a hard and fast rule for that. I've found that even the decision, like you're still deciding between two values there. One value is if I just leave just because something said leave, that feels really bad and kind of disconnecting from my friends. Like I feel like I'm not honoring my friends by just being like, see ya, I'm out of there, right? So that has a kind of signal to it. That kind of a decision has a signal. And then the signal about being there has a signal, right? So that in itself is kind of weighing between the energy of disconnecting from your friends versus following this personal intuitional signal. And one of those is probably going to have a stronger signal. Like there may be some days where disconnecting to your friends is only like a minor little blip, but being there feels really heavy. So it's easy to make it, it's easy to kind of follow your inner signal there, because one signal is much stronger than the other. Or I constantly having moments where my intuition's like, nah, I don't want to do this. But the value of staying connected with folks and, staying with a group means something to me in that moment. That like that's something I'm hungrier for than just having a good weekend, or just following my little signal on something, if that makes sense. And that's an experiment. Like I've had a lot of times where, something in me says, don't go there. Like that beach isn't the right beach. That restaurant isn't the right restaurant. This is not a good place to spend time. But I'm also with a partner who wants to feel the balance of actually getting to choose and lead sometimes. And so the value of letting someone else lead feels like intuitionally more important than using my signal to figure out where to be and enforcing that idea on everyone else or disconnecting from them. Sometimes it's inverse. Staying connected does not feel that important, and what feels more important is being exactly where I want to be. Does that make sense? That it's two different signals. You're just feeling which one your intuition is saying, this is the most important value right now to pursue. I kind of go back to the Aristotle's ethics again, but I want to say it a different way. Sometimes it's like being at a buffet, and you may have a favorite item at the buffet. Like I love mac and cheese and I love fried chicken. And if I were only at a buffet once, I would go right for those 2 items. But if I were at the buffet every single day for a year and I'd chosen mac and cheese and chicken 100 times in a row, then something new like greens might appeal to me, because inside me there's a hunger for a new value. That value might be variety. Like the need for variety, the hunger for it is rising inside me. And the desire for that same predictable pleasure is it's not as valuable anymore. It's kind of lowering. So I might notice that I could choose that thing I like, but that acute need for variety is now rising above all the other values, and I'm choosing from that quality. Does that make sense? Like that quality of the spectrum is the thing I'm reaching for now. And that might, once I have like apple strudel and green beans once, and I'm like, that sucks. Or like, why did I do that? Then the need for variety sort of sinks again. And maybe that old thing I was reaching for rises again, like predictability might become, I find I'm constantly sliding between stability and adventure. These are 2 things that are kind of on a spectrum for me. And if I've been hanging out on a beach for a week, like place I've never been, then maybe the thing I'm most hungry for is Wi-Fi, which is where I'm at today. Like, I just got a crappy Airbnb because I thought the Wi-Fi was good. Well, I was wrong on that, but I was reaching for that predictable Wi-Fi signal, whereas I had a week of beach time, and so that's why these maps are changing over time. As you go through your experience, like different needs and values will rise up and peak in different ways. If that makes sense.
I'd like to interject about that experimentation process. I found it very helpful to like write down when my intuition has told me to do something or not do something, and then the choice that I made, and then the outcome. And so like, you got this intuition not to go, and then you went, and then, what the outcome was of that. And just how it felt going into it, where like, okay, was it more of like a fear of being around new people, or was it like you didn't want to be uncomfortable, or was it, like you said, just not your vibe? And then also my intuition has told me to do things that I did not want to do. And when I've done them, like, okay, like really pay attention to what happens. And oftentimes something crazy or magical will happen that I had no way of knowing in advance was going to happen. But so I've just found like in the experiment process, just really paying attention and like journaling on the intuition and then the effects of the choice that I made with going with it or not, and how it turned out. I found that very useful.
Yeah, that's great. Because that's what that's doing, is it's going, you're participating with your cognition, your thinking process. So you're letting that information get really big and feed in like a big signal into the loops that you're going through in your thinking process. And so all that information kind of gets like layer caked into it. It's like a layer cake with a jelly. You're getting the jelly in there. And that jelly becomes useful as your brain's going through its little, there's a little bit more information there. And that little more information over time can actually bend the arc of your thinking process into a new space.
And clarity, you get clarity.
Clarity, yeah.
I also really, like that's something that I feel like there's so many people that have a lot of FOMO on like, oh, I got invited to this thing, now I have to go. And I find it so liberating to say no and just go like, oh yeah, I didn't feel like the right vibe. And you know what, if it's not a full fuck yes for me, I don't know, like, or at least a part of me that's like, yeah, that's my vibe. And I've been, I haven't gone to so many things now because I just was like, it's just not worth my energy. Yeah. And I may miss out on stuff, but I think the cool part about like, getting more used to and like getting closer to yourself and knowing like, what are the environments that actually make you light up and find good people. Yeah. And you kind of start getting a sense for like, I tried this like dozens of times and I was always really bored. So can we integrate that? And I feel like if you look for the full fuck yes, even though, there's still, and then there's other situations where you should go into, but you have all this fear and you're really ambivalent, but I think you can still feel you can hear the fuck yes inside you somewhere. It's just really muted.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you feel
the ambivalence. I'm like, ambivalence, I don't know, like maybe maybe I know exactly what I need, but I'm just, you know, there's FOMO, there's friends pressuring you, there's this like, oh, I could do this cool thing. I don't know, and I think that's like cool thing to tune into. And I think
like
what
that idea of a little fuck yes hiding under a bushel of fear, and it's like
yeah, and I think we know when that comes up. Like I'm pretty confident that you can hear that, even though it's really loud and hard to hear. But I think if there's an ambivalence of like, should I not? I'm just going because I think I should, or I got invited, or I'm doing somebody a favor. I don't know, like I don't have time for this shit anymore. Like it's like, you know, like I much rather prefer like a night day at home, like a quiet day, you know, at home than trying to be somebody who I don't want to be.
Yeah.
And that's
And
so liberating.
COVID's giving me the excuse to do exactly that, Olivia.
I know, right? COVID's kind of great.
It's pretty great that way. One of the things that's sort of been and kind of coming in my mind too is being in a conversation with somebody and having a little glimmer of something about a comment or an understanding or an insight, and recognizing over time that it's kind of like what you were talking about, Eric, of if you follow the thing and really ride it, it begins to expand and becomes this whole other direction for you. I've started to really recognize the energetic resonance of those little asides and the feeling or the aspect of them as that still quiet voice that if you could really easily overlook. But if you are listening well enough with those several layers, you can kind of you hear the tag on it, you know, you feel the sort of pull of it, and you're able to note it long enough to be able to really see it, as opposed to it just being like in the corner of your eye. And you can't look directly at it, but you can sort of be understanding that it's happening, and then sort of say, okay, I'm going to follow up on that, you know, or I'm at least going to be like, this is one of the main things that I'm going to take out of this conversation besides the sort of logical trajectory of where it goes. Yeah.
And this is where the experimentation helps, because you start to develop a trust in that little signal. Even though it's like a little bit signal, it develops real muscle because you know where it takes you, and so you can trust it even when it's telling you to go someplace crazy, you know, like that you wouldn't, someplace that doesn't feel safe even. Yes. That was my 8-year-old self that said go to Greece. I want to talk real briefly about something that feels important that I neglected to say at the beginning of this, is a model of what's happening. Now, I'm not going to say I know what the model is, but I want to kind of give you some playful ideas of what the model could be. And, you know, through experimentation, you might start to get a sense for yourself what it could be. One model that I like is that we are, you know, our bodies do not end at our skin. Like, we are a part of an expanded being. Like there is a bigger aspect to ourself that likely resides in multiple dimensions of energy. Meaning there's probably a timeless part of ourselves. There's a part of ourselves that is focused in this particular time-space address, in this particular density of material. And that there's also a part of ourselves that is free of that focus. Or you might think of it like a parabola, that, you know, there's a focus point, but then there's like a part of us that expands and gets really big and fuzzy at some level. And that part might have a perspective that this focus part of us does not have. So there's a conversation that's happening between this focus part of us and the part of us that is maybe more eternal or expanded or just connected to more. Maybe it could be almost like an inverse root structure, that as we go up the energy spectrum, we're connected to maybe our family, our society, and maybe into all of life. You know, at some point that there's a conversation we're having with that level of ourself and the part of ourself that's here. Even within ourself, there's multiple personalities talking. There's multiple, like, mom voice, like even within the microcosm of our skin, there's also these kind of little channels that exist inside of ourselves, and they're all in conversation. So some of this could be the tug of that conversation between that expanded part of ourselves and the part of ourselves that is having a more linear experience here. And that the language, there's a real language barrier between this focused point and this super expanded everything point. And so it's not always easy for this expanded part of us to say, you need to go to this party and this is exactly why. You know, like the signal, like I'm living in Greece, like there are language barriers. Sometimes, you know, like pointing and grunting is like all you get, you know? And I think maybe people who are channels or maybe psychics or people who are more gifted at the translation. For me, like when I'm working with people, I get these energetic shapes. They're like tension structures, and I feel them, and then I translate it into a metaphor. And that's kind of like, that's something that happens to me all the time. And I get a sense of this like energetic shape, tension structure, metaphor, bam, 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 symbol. You know, and some people I think are really lucid with like, they can say things directly, but then sometimes we just get like a little shove or like a little like nudge or a little contraction or a little opening. And that might be the best language that we've got. Like for me, I can't have a conversation in Greek, but I can order coffee, you know, and so there might be a little bit of that happening, you know, like these little energetic signals might just be the little grunts and nudges of our higher self. You don't have to use that model, you know, like I don't want to sell a model. Like that's the model I kind of work with. But I find that some people are not comfortable with just buying into that automatically. And that there are ways to explain this that don't need that model. Part of it can also be that there's something happening in your animal brain. There's like levels of circuitry and thinking that exist in the greater part of our nervous system that our cerebral cortex is maybe receiving directive from. That could also be, and maybe it's a little bit of both. You know, maybe at the end point of every nerve is like really a wire that goes into another dimension, you know, and that we're like receiving this bigger signal. I don't think, we're trying to figure it out. I don't think anybody really has the perfect definition. Miley, an end to upside down thinking.
Thinking. This is an amazing book. I'm almost done with it. And it's basically this dude who worked in Silicon Valley and was in finance. And he just got fascinated by the idea of consciousness underlying everything rather than the materialistic point of view. And so he started digging into all the research on paranormal, like remote viewing, telepathy, all kinds of fun stuff like that. And so he just dug into all the research, and it's just a really fun read because it presents scientific evidence of all these things that we feel or experience that are outside of the norms. And then it gives kind of a basis. Well, like if consciousness is underlying everything, then it's actually not paranormal that you're getting intuitive messages or that you have telepathy with certain people or things like that. So yeah, I just wanted to recommend that book. It's by Mark Gober. It's really good.
That's great. Okay, I'm going to read that. Because I think that there are some people who really are building some of these great models. You know, there's information out there.
And I was going to say he has a metaphor that I think he got from another scientist, but he talks about consciousness being, you know, like a river, and then an individual is a whirlpool. And so you're still part of consciousness, but you're like a focalized point where it's the whirlpool is in your body, but you still can like get water from other places. And then when you die, the whirlpool returns to the river, and maybe will reform later down the stream. But it's an interesting metaphor.
That's a great metaphor.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, we try on some of these models, you know, like I've heard several really great ones. They're all super compelling. And, you know, if you try the model on, sometimes it will allow you to extrapolate, you know, from the model. Like the metaphor will show you the next steps. You know, if you're using the whirlpool metaphor, you might notice that there are moves you can make that are whirlpool moves, that because you're playing with the metaphor, you're like, oh, oh, like when I see the world through this lens, suddenly I see some options that weren't there before. And if the options work, it's like, oh, there's something to this, you know? Okay, I want to just give 3 games you can play real quick that will heighten this. One of them is the intuitive walk. And just before you do all these, find your signal. For me, I spend a little time just getting quiet, connecting my energy down through the center of my being, you know, through my brain, getting a feeling for what my heart feels like, a feeling for what the back of my heart feels like, my stomach, my hips, and then the flow itself, like the flow and movement of energy in my body. And those are just little signals that I can turn on. Maybe you just want to like tap into your heart. You know, that might be a good place to start. Maybe you just want to tap into where your feet want to go. And then go on a walk, but take bus money and don't know where the walk's going to end or which route you're going to take. And just at every intersection, think of it like a decision point. Like this is a decision point that you go through in daily life, but it's in the form of a street. And just feel out each direction of the intersection. If you're in one of those nice square grids, you know, that can be fun. It's like you could end up on the other side of town, or you can end up walking in circles. That's why I say take bus money, because you really want to detach from what you see ahead. It's easy in Portland because everything's kind of flat. And, you know, in cities with terrain, you might fixate. You're like, oh, I'm going to go to that mountain. And then that can actually sometimes work against you feeling in the moment which turn to take, you know? So play with that one a little bit. And it's what it does is it just amplifies the signal. It gets you used to feeling the signal, making decisions based on that signal. It's nice to make low impact decisions based on that signal so that you can kind of see what happens, and then, you know, trust that signal more and more, right? You want to get a feel for like feeling out your decision gateways. Another one that I find really useful is my to-do list in the morning. I make a list of everything that I need to do and everything that I want to do, and then maybe some other things and things that other people tell me I should be doing. And I just put them in a list, and then I go through and I kind of feel each one out. And then I just kind of make some kind of notation for what lights me up, and maybe some notation for what I don't want to do. And then I kind of bubble those things that light me up to the top of the list, and I just try to do them. Now, what's funny is going to the park, going to Rooster Rock, and watching TV might be at the top of your list for 3 days. And if you pursue them for 3 days, or if you have the freedom to pursue them for the 3 days, you might notice that on the 4th day, they're the last thing you want to do, right? Just notice how, you know, take a little time to kind of experiment with this, because it's
Hey, how's it going?
good. Who is that?
Sounded like Olivia.
Oh, that's so, no, I think it was Kyrie. That's so funny. So what you're doing is you're noticing the vibration of your prioritization, you know, like how you prioritize things and place them. And you're not, you know, like the idea is to step out of the, I need to do this, I have to do this. I want to notice how naturally, energetically, I start to sort these things. And what you might notice when you're playing that game is that your choice feels more like a choice and less like a kind of assertion that you might resist. Does that make sense? If you've watched TV and played video games for 3 days in a row, doing your taxes might feel really fulfilling on the 4th day, because you notice you're hungry for it, not that you have to do it or you should do it. So just run the experiment for a point in time. It might work for you, it might not. You know, some people need that inner parent to say, I don't care what you want to do, you're going to do this first, and then you can do that. It's a game. You're just sort of mapping out how that decision-making process happens and how that prioritization process happens inside you. And then the third one is doing it in conversations. Notice each step of the conversation. How is the next thing I'm about to say feel before it comes out of my mouth? And if it feels bad and I let it come out anyway, observing what happens, like what's the result, like how did it go? Or if I feel bad when I'm about to say it and I don't want to go that way, take a moment and see if you can feel inside yourself for a thing that you could say that has a signal that lights you up a little bit more. Take a breath, take a breath and just feel around in the dark a little bit for something that feels like it has some energy that really resonates with you, and then see if you can lay that into the conversation space with each other. And let's see. And then I'd say the big one is through meditation. When you start to feel into your beliefs and your perceptions, that's the super transformative one. So it's kind of practicing with these other 3 exercises first, but when you start to move through your day and you notice what triggers you, and you're able to identify, wow, that trigger, I hear a voice with that trigger, I hear a certain belief, that like, you're even monitoring the minor perturbations of your insides. Maybe you just see someone on the street that like sparks an idea in your head. That can be super powerful, because as you start to map that out, maybe journal it, capture it, so that you're actually paying attention to that, you might notice that a certain belief you land on over and over again cost you 10 life force, credits, or just takes your energy from here to here. And that's where that map becomes super useful in your cognitive process, because you're not just automatically going back through the same perception. You have this new signal that over time is awakening you to the cost of it. You're starting to see the long-term cost of this perception about people, the long-term cost of this judgment, the long-term cost of, whatever it is that you're doing over and over again. And your brain will start to use this topographical information to kind of move things around, to reorganize. That's when you'll start to get that aha moment, like, I'm not playing this out again. I'm not gonna say the same thing over again. I'm not gonna go through the same dynamic with someone, the same conversation with someone. And this is where the map becomes hugely useful. It becomes kind of the fulcrum that allows you to start reorganizing and kind of reconditioning your brain into new patterns. But you have to have the map first. Like the map, you don't need the map, but it's nice to see these things in their subtlety rather than just hitting a wall. Like if you just slam into a cliff, and the map didn't show you the slow incremental grade that was bringing you near the cliff, well, the cliff is a learning moment, but it's just more energetically graceful and efficient to feel these things in their little subtleties, and use that rather than hitting the cliff or hitting the wall. Because once you hit the cliff and the wall, it's a lot of work, but it's just uncomfortable. I like to be comfortable. That's why I like the subtlety. If you only learn by 2x4s to the head, well, it's very fast, but it's not always as gentle and fun, and graceful as you learning the other way. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? We're like an hour, 45 minutes, so I don't want to take everyone's time too much, but do we have any questions?
In the event description, it said it was an hour and a half long, so we're only 10 minutes over.
Oh, great. Fabulous. I don't know. I've never been able to end one of these things in an hour, ever.
Well, it's a good thing you gave yourself an extra 30 minutes.
Good. Does anybody have any questions or insights or things that like pop for you, or anything you want to share? Okay, great. If you like this, you feel like contributing, you could PayPal me at nielseneric@yahoo.com or Eric-Nielsen-1 on Venmo. It's donation based, so however you're sitting with COVID and all that kind of stuff, just find that inner place that feels right. Use that Aristotelian just right balance, where it's like, this is the right feeling. Like too much this way is not right, too much this way is not right. Just find that like nice little balance. Or if you need to be free, that's great too. No problem. It was so good hearing everyone contribute. I love seeing your faces. It was like once the group voice started to develop, like that's the real joy for me. So next time I think I'm going to try to get more of that happening sooner, because I didn't invite no dummies to this conversation. Yeah, it was great hearing everything you had to say. It's great seeing your little baby, Maya Lila.
They're cute.
Nice wizard beard, George. It's really
Thanks.
doing well.
It's COVID neglect turning into something. So same with
It's
all of
pretty-
this.
It's pretty cool, actually. I
Nice.
like it. Good
Thank
look for you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to see you and hear you.
You
Yes.
too. Yeah. I just got back to Athens today. I was in Salamina Island for a week, which was where the big battle of Salamis, where Athens defeated the Persian Navy. You know, it was kind of the big turning point. Lots of cute beaches. Oh my goodness. The whole island just has cute beaches around it. And
Wow.
Athens Athens has some sublime moments, but the neighborhood I picked is not one of them. It's just like a canyon of 5-story apartment buildings, just like all too close to each other. But it's near the coast, so I'm gonna walk after this. I'm gonna go for a run and go see the coast.
Did you use your intuition, or was there a value of being close to the coast?
I did use it, but I think this time it was more of a financial decision, because when you choose Airbnbs last minute, you know, for just a day, like sometimes the fees can be, you know, so it was me, like the value decision was more about like not wasting too much money on a one-night Airbnb, if that makes sense. Yeah. But yeah, I also use my intuition too. I definitely use my intuition around where I'm going to be, because I look at a map and then I just sort of feel like right now it's like, do I want to be outside of this country or inside this country? That, you know, it's like, okay, I want to be inside right now. And then I kind of feel regionally, like, do I want to be up in Thessaloniki or Athens? Do I want to be in Crete? Do I want to be an island? And then Athens is continually pulled at me. So, you know, so I just keep, you know, I keep like, and every time, you know, it's like you get into a more resolution, like, okay, which neighborhood feels good? Which, you know, which apartment feels good? And some of that's like visual, mental, like, okay, I want a washing machine, I want a balcony, I want air conditioning. But then sometimes it's like, it's definitely like a resonance kind of thing. Like I feel, oh yeah, that one tugs me a lot more. And then, but sometimes picking apartments, it's also like, it's all the same sometimes too. Yeah. You know, it's like that signal feels like this signal. So just pick one, you know, just pick one. Pick one. That's another thing I meant to say is sometimes it's not like picking the right thing. It's just picking a thing and then softening your beliefs around it to let it be right. Mm-hmm. You know, like just making like there's a great, like sometimes you can get caught up in this game where you're like, oh, I made the wrong decision. Mm-hmm. And it's like, feel into it until you make the decision. And then once you've made the decision, you can always give yourself the out, you know, like of backing out, being like, don't want it. Mm-hmm. But it's also nice to sort of say, I'm going to make whatever decision I make be the right decision, mm-hmm. which is what comes after the decision, where you just relax into it, you know, you say, okay.
I've been thinking about that a lot recently, just with the surrendering and the trusting, because I used mm-hmm. to do that a lot, and then I have not done that recently at all. So it's kind of getting back to that, like, okay, like surrendering the things that I think I want and I need and I'm not happy about and I want different. I'm like, well, maybe just being okay with what is and surrendering that I'm on my path and just letting it all flow, and mm-hmm. Getting more into that space rather than the controlling space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard, especially when you're playing this sort of feel into it game, you know, because you are adopting a kind of like graceful control, but you got to balance it. I mean, I have to balance it out with this, like just letting the boat float down the river thing, you know, quit, you know, like not getting stressed out about which side of the river I need to be on. It's just like the river is going to take me.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So this feels like being in Portland and California and Oregon right now. It's so good. Yay. I'm going to do more of this if I have good Wi-Fi.
Do it.
That's awesome.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Good night.